You sent us this massive, just a giant stack of research and articles, plus your own notes on medical device innovation.
Oh yeah, it's quite a pile, I know.
It is, and after going through all of it for today's deep dive, a very clear and honestly a slightly terrifying theme emerged for me.
Right, the baseline acceptable risk.
Exactly. It all comes down to that. Imagine for a second that you, our listener, are buying a brand new car. You're standing on the dealership lot, and the salesperson leans in and says, "Just so you know, we only mostly tested the brakes."
Yeah, they work beautifully about 99% of the time.
Right. You would walk right off that lot. You wouldn't even consider putting your family in that vehicle. But now take that exact same scenario, but the device we're talking about isn't a car. It's a robotic surgical tool operating inside your chest cavity.
Or an implantable device permanently integrated into your cardiovascular system. And the stakes in that environment, they completely alter the entire engineering philosophy. In the medical industry, the concept of close enough simply, it just cannot exist.
No, of course not.
We're talking about an environment governed by the most stringent regulatory and performance standards in the entire world. Because when a device is interacting directly with the human body, even the most microscopic measurement error,
like just a tiny fraction of a millimeter.
Yeah, a fraction of a millimeter of overextension or a tiny miscalculation in applied pressure that could lead to total mechanical failure. And the downstream effects of that are, compromised surgical results or severe direct harm to a patient.
Which brings us to the core mission of today's deep dive. Because to understand how that absolute perfection is actually achieved, we have to look at the invisible microscopic sensor technology acting as the hidden backbone of all this healthcare innovation.
Right, the physical force measurement.
Yes, specifically, your notes focus heavily on precision force measurement, highlighting Interface's load cells and their sensor technologies. Basically, the components making sure that when a medical device touches you, it does exactly what it's supposed to do.
And it's funny because we rarely think about the physical forces at play in medicine,
Yeah, we think about biology, right?
Exactly. The public imagination focuses entirely on biology and chemistry, pharmaceuticals, genetics, cellular reactions. But physical force is completely foundational. How hard a surgical tool is pushing, how much weight a prosthetic limb can bear.
How tightly a robotic arm is gripping a scalpel.
Yes, because if engineers don't have exact, perfectly reliable physical force data, they just cannot guarantee a biological outcome.
Well, so since that margin for error is absolutely zero, I was trying to figure out how manufacturers actually guarantee that safety before a piece of technology ever even makes it to a hospital room. Because, a single test at the end of the assembly line obviously isn't going to cut it for the FDA.
Oh, not even close. No, it requires integrating precision force measurement throughout the entire life cycle of the device.
So from day one?
Literally day one. It starts in the earliest conceptual stages of design. Engineers use these force sensors to validate exactly how different raw materials, say a new titanium alloy or a flexible polymer, how they behave under simulated real-world conditions.
Okay.
And then it moves into validation testing, where they actively try to break the device. They want to find its absolute physical limits over millions of cycles. And it even extends into ongoing performance monitoring once the device is actually in production.
So it never stops.
Right. Because the whole goal is generating incredibly accurate, highly repeatable data. Repeatability is the single metric that regulatory bodies demand above all else.
See, I have to push back on that life cycle a bit, just based on the literature you sent us, because we hear constantly about this urgent need for innovation in healthcare. We want the next life-saving robotic technique or the next revolutionary prosthetic to hit the market, like yesterday.
Right, everyone wants it immediately.
Yeah, so doesn't this massive burden of strict regulatory testing, this obsessive validation at every single step of development, doesn't that actually slow innovation down? It sounds like an endless mountain of red tape that would terrify a startup.
That assumption that regulation stifles innovation is so common. But when you look closely at how biomedical engineering actually functions, the reality is a complete paradox. Precision force measurement is the very thing driving the innovation forward.
Wait, really? By forcing engineers to test a single hinge 10,000 times, that drives innovation.
Yeah, think about the psychology of engineering under extreme uncertainty. If you're designing, let's say, an artificial heart valve, and you don't know exactly how much fluid pressure a new ultra-thin biomaterial can handle, what do? You have to guess.
Oh, I see.
And Because human life is on the line, you guess conservatively. You over-engineer it. You make the valve thicker, bulkier, and ultimately less efficient. You deliberately hold the design back to ensure safety.
So you're building in a massive safety margin because you just don't know for sure.
Exactly. But when engineers have access to irrefutable, reliable force data from a trusted partner like Interface, that guesswork completely vanishes. They know precisely how those tiny components behave under extreme conditions.
And that lets them push the envelope.
Precisely. That absolute trust in the data gives them the confidence to strip away the bulk and develop much more complex, elegant, and advanced technologies.
Okay, that makes total sense. But before we get into the specific microscopic devices mentioned in this research, I'm sort of stuck on the basic physics of how this data is even gathered in the first place.
Hardware itself.
Yeah, a load cell is a piece of hardware. I understand it acts like a highly precise scale, but how does a solid block of metal actually feel a physical push and translate that into, a digital number on an engineer's screen?
It's actually a fascinating piece of physics. The mechanism relies on something called a strain gauge. Inside the load cell, there is a piece of metal specifically designed to flex.
Flex, like visibly bend.
Well, very slightly, usually microscopically. But when a force is applied to it, it bends. And bonded tightly to that metal is the strain gauge, which is essentially the very fine zigzagging pattern of electrically conductive foil or wire.
Okay, so when the metal block bends under pressure, the foil pattern glued to it has to bend too.
Exactly, you nailed it. And when that conductive foil stretches, the wire becomes slightly longer and thinner.
Kind of like pulling a rubber band.
That's the perfect analogy. Think of a rubber Band-Aid. When you pull it, it gets thinner in the middle, right? In electrical engineering, when a wire gets thinner, its electrical resistance increases. It literally becomes harder for an electrical current to pass through it.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So the load cell runs a constant known voltage through that foil. As the force stretches the gauge, the resistance changes, which alters the voltage coming out the other side. And that minute change in voltage is highly predictable and directly proportional to the physical force applied.
Okay, that makes total sense now. The physical deformation physically chokes the electrical flow.
Exact.
But, and this is a big but, if the entire mechanism relies on a physical piece of metal deforming, that creates a massive problem for the trends we're seeing in all this source material. Because everything in modern medicine is getting smaller.
Oh, absolutely. Miniaturization is the biggest trend.
Right. We're talking about minimally invasive surgical tools threading through veins or tiny, tiny implants. How do you fit a deforming block of metal and electrical wiring into a tool that's already the size of a needle? I mean, the physics just don't seem to add up there.
Yeah, the scale of the engineering required to solve that is staggering. And this is exactly where the industry relies heavily on miniature load cells. Interface specifically designs these compact, high-accuracy sensors for environments where physical space is virtually non-existent. But precision remains entirely non-negotiable.
How small are we talking?
We're talking about sensors that can measure capacities down to fractions of a pound force, packaged into housings smaller than a dime.
Wow. Smaller than a dime. And the research highlights their use in advanced surgical robotics, right? Which makes sense. If we look at a robotic arm performing a delicate internal suturing procedure, the robot doesn't have a central nervous system.
Right, it doesn't have a brain feeling its fingers.
Exactly. It doesn't have the tactile feedback that a human surgeon has in their fingertips to know if they're, pulling a stitch too tight or pressing too hard.
And that's exactly it. The miniature load cell serves as that missing nervous system. It provides the tactile feedback. If a robotic pincer is grasping a delicate blood vessel, it absolutely needs to know the exact micro pressure being applied in real time so it doesn't just crush the tissue.
Right, which would be catastrophic.
Completely. So the miniature load cell embedded in the pincer measures that tissue resistance, that tiny fraction of a pound force, and feeds it back to the operating system instantly.
But wait, if you attach a standard sensor to the tip of a tiny, perfectly balanced robotic scalpel, haven't you just ruined the scalpel? I mean, the act of measuring the tool alters the physical profile of the tool itself.
That's the genius of it. The integration has to be completely seamless. Interface's miniature load cells are designed to be native to the device's architecture.
What does that mean, native?
It means they're machined to be a structural component of the tool itself, not just a bulky add-on strapped to the side. They capture the data transparently without interfering with the mechanical function or the physical profile of the instrument as it threads through the patient's body.
That is wild. I mean, Measuring a fraction of a pound force inside a surgical tool, it's honestly like trying to weigh a single snowflake while it's resting on the tip of a needle without the needle even moving.
That's a great way to put it. It's an incredible feat of engineering.
But reading through the biomechanics notes you provided, there's another layer here. Biology is inherently messy. It's fluid, it's multidirectional.
Oh, very much so.
A prosthetic leg, for example, isn't just a piston pushing straight down into the ground. When a patient takes a step, the heel strikes, pushing down and forward. And then as they roll through the step, the ankle mechanism twists and the materials have to absorb lateral shock from uneven terrain.
Yeah, human movement is incredibly complex. Operating in the real world means operating in complex, multi-dimensional environments. If an engineer only tests a prosthetic leg using a single-axis load cell, meaning they just press straight down on it repeatedly in a lab, they are entirely blind to the reality of how that device will actually be used.
It would be like trying to describe a 3D movie while only looking at a 2D photograph.
Exactly. You miss all the depth. This is why multi-axis sensing is absolutely mandatory for advanced biomechanical engineering.
Because if you only measure the vertical axis, you have absolutely no idea what the shear forces, the side-to-side forces are doing to the socket, where the prosthetic actually attaches to the patient's residual limb.
Right. And that lateral friction is exactly what causes tissue damage, blistering, or eventual microfractures in the structural joints of the prosthetic itself.
So the multi-axis sensor fixes that blind spot.
Yes, a multi-axis sensor captures forces in multiple directions simultaneously, the X, Y, and Z axis. It provides a holistic understanding of how forces interact within a device. It tells the engineering team not just that the leg can hold a 200-pound person, but that the slight twisting motion during a normal walking gait will cause a specific bolt to shear after 50,000 steps.
Which is life-saving data. And speaking of twisting motions, the notes also heavily emphasize torque measurement alongside multi-axis sensing. Now, assuming we understand torque as a rotational force, why is it so uniquely difficult to measure and control in a medical setting?
It really comes down to the density and variability of human tissue. Think about a high-speed dental instrument, or actually a better example, the heavy-duty orthopedic drills used in joint replacement surgeries to hollow out bone.
Okay.
Torque transducers specifically measure that rotational force. You're dealing with a tool rotating at incredibly high speeds into a biological material that is not uniform at all. Bone has dense spots, it has porous spots.
So the resistance the drill meets is constantly rapidly changing as it goes deeper.
Constantly, millisecond by millisecond. If the drill applies too much rotational force, when it hits a dense piece of bone, it generates excessive heat. And that heat can cause thermal necrosis, literally killing the surrounding bone tissue and basically ensuring the implant will fail to fuse properly.
Oh my God, or it could just shatter the bone.
It can shatter the bone entirely, yes. Conversely, if it applies too little force, the procedure stalls. Torque transducers provide the exact level of rotational control required to navigate that variable tissue safely. They instantly adjust the power output of the surgical tool based on the resistance it encounters.
That is incredible. So, synthesizing all of this, we have the strain gauges physically deforming to change electrical resistance. We have miniature load cells acting as the tactile fingertips for surgical robots. We have multi-axis sensors mapping the messy 3D reality of human movement, and torque transducers managing high-speed rotational forces in bone surgery.
Got it. That's the landscape.
And there's always a but. A changing electrical voltage isn't a report. I mean, how does this raw analog electrical signal actually turn into the massive coherent data sets that the FDA demands?
Right. That translation step is handled by data acquisition systems, commonly referred to as DAQ systems, because collecting the physical data via the sensor is really only half the equation.
You have to actually read it.
Exactly. You have to capture, store, and analyze that electrical signal in real time and convert it into a digital format that software can process.
So if the miniature load cell is the hardware, the data acquisition system is basically the translator that speaks the language of regulatory compliance.
That's a great way to put it, yes. It's the translator.
It seems like it would be similar to measuring the speed of a flowing river. The physical force applied to a sensor is a continuous analog flow. But to analyze it digitally, the DAQ system has to scoop up distinct buckets of water discrete samples of the electrical voltage every single millisecond to build a digital profile of the current.
That is exactly how digital sampling works. The DAQ system takes that continuous analog voltage change from the strain gauge and samples it thousands of times per second.
Thousands.
Thousands. This allows engineers to identify micro trends, like a sudden millisecond spike in force that occurs right before a polymer snaps, a detail that a slower sampling rate would completely miss. But crucially, the DAQ system is what provides the cryptographic level proof of safety for regulators.
Because the FDA doesn't just want a summary report saying, hey, we tested it and it works fine. They want the immutable proof.
They demand exhaustive documentation. The data acquisition systems ensure the force data is perfectly recorded, mathematically accurate, and proven to be repeatable across thousands of distinct trials. Proving that the device behaves predictively under stress is the bridge between a brilliant engineering concept and a legally compliant, market-ready medical reality.
But looking at the sheer variety of devices in these sources, I mean, a dental drill looks nothing like an artificial heart valve, which looks nothing like an IV fluid monitoring system. I imagine you can't just buy a standard one-size-fits-all load cell off a shelf, plug it into a DQ system, and start testing.
Oh, absolutely not. The environmental variables make off-the-shelf solutions impossible for advanced medical devices. This highlights the critical role of OEM customization, or original equipment manufacturer solutions.
Because every device is totally unique.
Right. Medical devices inherently have bizarre geometries, strict weight limits, and incredibly demanding environmental requirements.
Well, yeah, I mean, the environment inside the human body is basically a warm, corrosive saltwater bath.
Exactly. The sensors have to be hermetically sealed to survive bodily fluids without degrading, or worse, leaching materials into the patient. Furthermore, reusable surgical tools have to be sterilized in autoclaves.
Right, the superheated steam cleaners.
Yeah, they subject the tools to high-pressure steam and temperatures exceeding 270 degrees Fahrenheit. A standard industrial sensor would melt or short out immediately in those conditions.
So Interface has to build bespoke sensors that can survive those specific extremes while still maintaining that microscopic precision we talked about earlier.
They do. They work directly with the medical OEMs to develop entirely custom force measurement solutions. If an engineer is building a proprietary robotic arm, Interface designs a sensor molded to fit exactly within that specific proprietary joint architecture, using materials rated for repeated autoclave sterilization.
Wow.
That customization is what actually allows manufacturers to seamlessly integrate force measurement into the next generation of healthcare technology.
You know, when you step back and look at the entirety of the research you sent us, it fundamentally reframes how you look at the modern medical landscape.
It really does. It's everywhere.
Yeah. I mean, for you listening, the next time you're sitting in a dentist chair listening to the pitch of that drill change, or you see a video of a robotic surgical arm, or even if you're just visiting a friend in the hospital and you look at a standard IV fluid bag hanging next to the bed, you're going to realize something.
You'll see the invisible layer.
Exactly. You'll know there is a hidden microscopic world of precision force measurement operating right in front of you. Interfaces technology from the strain gauges, translating physical bends into electrical signals, to the multi-axis sensors feeling out the 3D world, to the DAQ systems proving it all to the regulators. It's the invisible foundation making sure you and your loved ones stay safe.
It really acts as an invisible safety net. It removes the uncertainty of the physical world, which is ultimately what allows the medical field to push forward and innovate fearlessly.
Which brings up a final thought for you to take away from today's deep dive. We spent this entire time talking about how Interface's sensors measure microscopic forces to validate a medical device before it's ever used, or, to guide a robotic tool during a surgery.
Right, in the moment.
But what happens when these microscopic, custom-designed sensors become a permanent, wirelessly linked part of our own bodies?
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Imagine a future, and honestly, based on these trends, it isn't far off, where your own orthopedic implants constantly measure internal multi-axis forces in real time. Imagine an artificial knee that tracks its own shear strain, predicting a bone fracture or surrounding tissue damage before the injury ever even occurs.
It just pings your phone to warn you to adjust your stride.
Exactly. The exact same technology making sure the brakes work before the car leaves the lot could soon be monitoring the road for you mile after mile, seamlessly integrated into your own biology, something to mull over.